Good morning. I don't know if you noticed, we seem to have a color theme going on this morning, and it was...
We could get our pictures up.
And I didn't even send a memo.
Oh, yes, we did.
Oh, yeah, it was... Anyway. Well, do you know what the two saddest words are in any language? Throw out a guess. Could be, but no, that's not what I'm thinking of. What was that? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you. The two saddest words in any language are if only. How many of you have used those words or thought those words? If only. Well, when I was 20 years old, I was living in Wichita, Kansas, and going to school. And I was dating one of the football players on the Wichita State University football team. And this was a young man who I very quickly fell in love with. I mean, he was so wonderful in many, many different ways, and I'd never met anybody like that. He wanted to be a minister, and he was head of the local Christian Athletes Association there, and often was a guest speaker at a church nearby that we would go to. And so he was just incredible and somebody I looked up to. And I have to admit, I had some dreams about being a minister's wife. Funny how things work out. Well, anyway, as I mentioned, John played on the football team at Wichita State. And one night we got together in the dorm cafeteria where we always got together at night to talk about our day and just different things going on the campus. And John was so excited that particular night. He said, "Carla, guess what? I've been chosen to play on the first string at this weekend's game." The game was in Utah. And at the time, I thought that was great because this is the first time he'd ever had the opportunity to do that. But, I was coming down with a cold or the flu and not feeling too well, and I was kind of having this little pity party, oh, woe is me. And so that night when he told me that, I just sort of said, "Well, oh gosh, John, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you." And he says, "Well, let's go celebrate. Let's go celebrate." And I said, I think I'm just going to go up to the dorm and go to bed early tonight. And when you get back from the game, we'll go out and celebrate and we'll talk. So anyway, I went up to my dorm room and I went to bed. And the next day, my roommates came into the room because I'd stayed home from classes. And they said, "There's been a plane crash." And as it turned out, the plane that the first string was flying on crashed into a mountain in Colorado. Well, I couldn't help but think about that night before and what I had done and what I had said and how wrapped up in my own little petty stuff I was. And I wasn't there for John to share his excitement. I wasn't in the present moment because I was so preoccupied with my own stuff. And I thought, why didn't I tell him how much I cared about him? Why didn't I tell him I loved him? Because I did, but I never told him. I was always waiting for that perfect moment. If only. If only. All of us have experienced regret at one time or other in our lives. You know, if only I had just gone back to college and finished my degree. If only I had just tried harder in our relationship. If only I hadn't gone down that mountain slope with moguls. That's another story. If only, if only, if only. It's about missing opportunities in our lives and how we look back at them. A lot of times with our if only, our regret, we're able to make it right. We're able to, if we said something hurtful to someone, we're able to go back and apologize, make it right. Or we're able to go back and finish college as we wanted to do and as we recognize later that we really should have done. But there are times when we have our regret when we're not able to go back and make it right. A lot of times when we do have those if-onlys, we're feeling a lot of guilt, self-blame, frustration, beating ourselves up because of something we did. How many of you know the story of Lot's wife? How many of you have heard that story? Well, as you remember, am I making that little noise that... Is there a noise I'm hearing or something?
Yes, I'm not sure what's causing it.
Okay. Well, I apologize if I'm making that noise. Anyway, well, as you know, Lot's wife, Lot was told by the angels of God that they were to leave Sodom and Gomorrah, and they were head to the hills. Well, metaphysically, the hills mean to move to a higher consciousness. Well, Lot, and let's face it, the male figures in the Bible refer to our thinking, our logical mind. And Lot told God, well, you know, I really don't want to travel that far. So can we just go to this smaller town called Zoar? And Zoar metaphysically means inferiority. So have you ever had times in your life when you didn't really feel that you were ready, that you might be inferior and unable to reach a higher consciousness? Well, that's how Lot was feeling. So he decided that he would just go to this smaller town that was closer by. It wasn't in the hills, but it was out of the valley. And so God agreed that he would protect him because Sodom and Gomorrah were going to go up in flames. Now, God also told Lot that no one in his family could look backwards, that they were to keep their eyes ahead, looking ahead. But Lot's wife, on the way to Zoar, looked back. Now, you notice in the Bible it never tells you what Lot's wife's name is. And in the Jewish traditions, from Hebrew, her name is Ethel, or Edith, Edith. So Lot's wife was named Edith. I thought you'd all want to know that. So anyway, here they are on their way to Zoar, and Edith makes the mistake of turning around and looking back. And she turns into what? a pillar of salt. Now, salt is a preservative, right? And metaphysically, what salt means or symbolizes is crystallization, coming together and forming something hard. And the idea of crystallization, and used in metaphysical terms, is that sense that our thoughts and our emotions come together and they create something hard that can hold us back. They crystallize. And the other thing they can do is sometimes form an illness, cause an illness in the physical body. And we talked about that when we were in ministerial school. They used to warn us about that, is how we could experience sometimes some illnesses in our life because of the crystallization process that we might encounter when we were going to school. Well, anyway, as I read that story about Lot's wife when I was in ministerial school, all of a sudden the lights went on and I realized that I had spent so much time in regret after John's death, that I had spent so much time thinking about and feeling regret for what I hadn't done, for what I hadn't said. And I was crystallized, I was stuck in this regret. And it was holding me back from living in the present and from also experiencing a happy future. And what ended up happening as a result of that was that I began to date boys that were not trustworthy. They would not treat me well because I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel that I deserved to have that. The other thing that happened within a year of John's death was that I developed a growth, a cyst on my ovary, which I didn't know about until about a year and a half later, and it ruptured, and I almost bled to death. So, this is what can happen when we don't allow regret to be healed. Louise Hay's book, Heal Your Body. How many of you are familiar with that? Oh, great. A lot of you have it. If you don't have a copy, I highly recommend that you get one, because anytime something happens with your body, if you look in there, it will give you some ideas of metaphysically what might have caused that ailment. It's very worthwhile, so I highly recommend it. But what Louise Hay said in her book about cysts is that it's about running an old, painful movie. Running an old, painful movie. So you keep running this old movie in your mind and thinking about what you should have done. What should I done? If only, if only. So, how do we handle this regret? How do we handle it in our lives? There should be a handout enclosed in your bulletin, so I encourage you to take that out. And we're going to go over those things that you'll find. If you don't have one, could you raise your hand, and we'll have one of the ushers get it to you. Anyone missing a handout? Okay. Well, the first thing that you can do about regret is to apologize. Apologize to the person that you hurt or said something to that you regret, even if it's someone that's no longer in the physical world. And I know that sounds funny, but I recommend this. If someone has died and you regret something that you did or didn't do, write a letter. Write a letter to that person or speak to that person. I have done this with people as a chaplain or in spiritual counseling, and it makes such a difference. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that our loved ones are with us in spirit, though they may not be with us physically. So by writing a letter, you can say what you need to say and get out those feelings and express them. Number 2, take advantage of those opportunities that you let slide by. Go back to college. Learn something new. It's never too late. I've heard of people going back to college in their 80s. So don't think about it as being behind you. Realize it's amazing what you can do still. The next one is look for the lessons learned from your experience. What did you learn about yourself? How will you live your life differently as a result of this experience? There are always lessons that we can learn from these experiences. For me, it was really about don't let things pass you by. Don't let these opportunities pass you by. And realize that you need to live in the moment. Forgive yourself and others. Always forgive yourself and others. And then realize the transitory nature of life. Appreciate each day and make the most of it. You know, how many times do we not say, I love you to someone? And we think, oh, I'll save that for another time, or tell somebody how much that we appreciate them. Don't wait. Don't ever put off something that you can do in that moment. Don't wait to say, I love you or I appreciate you, because you never know when you may not have that opportunity again. And be open to a blessing. Be open to a blessing. When my mother made her transition back in 1995, Bob and I had made several trips down there in the past to be with her, because she was living in Kansas and Bob and I were living in Chicago. And several times the people from the assisted living center that she lived at would give us a call and say, I think she's about ready to pass, so you better come. So Bob and I would pack our suitcases and get in the car, and we'd drive down to Kansas. And each time that we'd go down, my mother would rally and she'd start to feel better. And we always had a great time while we were there, but there was this sense that, well, we're here. And eventually Mother got so tired of this, she said, darn it, why can't I just die? Get it over with. And at the time she did this, she threw a plate against the wall. She was just expressing her rage that here we'd driven all this way, and she wasn't even able to die. What a disappointment, you know? So anyway, after 3 times of doing this and having this time, which was a real blessing to be with my mother, because we'd had issues and we got to know each other better and talk about things that we hadn't talked about. So anyway, the last time that we saw her was around Mother's Day, and so we spent Mother's Day with her, and then it was about a week, and we had to drive back to Chicago. And again, I had this feeling this may be the last time I see Mother again. And so Bob drove and I cried. Well, about a month later, we got another call. And this time it seemed more urgent because Mother was only semi-conscious. And Bob and I looked at each other and I said, there's no way that we can get there. There's no way. It's too late. So what ended up happening, and later in hindsight I saw this as divine order. This wonderful young nurse's aide was there on that day that Mother passed. She was her favorite aide. Her name was Tracy. And Tracy had told me that she had wanted to be a hospice nurse. So she was going back to school to get her degree and to go into nursing. And she was just this bright light, and Mother just loved her and looked forward to the days when she was going to be there. Well, that particular day, Tracy wasn't supposed to be there. She was off. But someone had become ill, called in, and Tracy came in to replace her. Well, I found out from Tracy later that she had sat with my mother in her bed and held her. And she told her to go to the light, and she sang to her. And I realized, how could I have ever wanted anything more wonderful for my mother as she made her transition? It was perfect. And I realized also that my mother had given us both a gift in that day. Mother knew that we would have to jump in the car and drive down there and be with her, and that we would never make it. And she knew that Tracy, who wanted to be a hospice nurse, that she would be the first person that Tracy ever was with who made her transition. So there was a gift to both of us in this situation. What we have to realize that as we say in our prayer for protection, wherever we are, God is. Wherever we are, God is. In every situation, God is. And so we never have to worry again. We should live with no regret and understand that there are gifts, lessons, and blessings in all there is. Let's prepare for meditation.